So our next session that we're just about to jump into is a little bit different than the sessions we've had up to this point. We are going to jump into a fireside chat, just a conversation with one of our fellow API security professionals. So give us just a second and we'll get him into the room. While we get him into the room, and then, oh, hi, there you are, Adam.
How's it going?
It's going great. Oh my gosh, the colors match. It's amazing. Love
It's
it.
not intentional. I was trying to find a place in the Airbnb that I'm at that didn't have the same color as my hair on the wall, and I couldn't find a good spot for it. So I'm just gonna go with it.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. I think it looks awesome. It's as if it was meant to be. So there you go.
Exactly.
So I'm joined here by Adam, and help me pronounce it. Is it Ariano or?
Yep, Ariano.
Ariano. Just wanted to make sure I was pronouncing that correctly. And Adam Ariano is the CISO over at a company called Binti, and a lot of you probably aren't familiar with that. So we're going to dive into that in a minute. But before we get into Binti and who Binti is and what your mission is there, can you walk me through a little bit of because you have an interesting background as well, how you came into security, kind of how you've grown up in the security space. And I know that you do a lot of mentoring and bringing other people along. And so I think understanding how you got to where you are is a really interesting story and valuable to a lot of people that are joining us that are just starting out in their cybersecurity, roles, or even just thinking about joining into cybersecurity. So I think giving them kind of hey, here's a great success story.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate being asked to come and talk to everybody. I'll give the short version of events because it is kind of a long and funny story of how I actually ended up in security. But I was, in South America when 9/11 happened way back when. And I knew there was some conflict coming. I knew something bad was going to happen. I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in violence, but I also wanted to be involved. And so I joined the Marine Corps, as most pacifists wouldn't, so that I could go be in the action and actually try and help things, be better. The Marine Corps liked me. They sent me to school to get a degree, they didn't tell me what to get. And so I ended up actually majoring in social work, which is the perfect degree to be a platoon commander because that's all I did all day, every day. And then once I got my social work degree, they trained me to be a communications officer. And so my last command as a Marine in 2016 was at Marine Corps Recruiting Command. So I was actually the CISO with a different title of Marine Corps Recruiting Command. And that's where I really cut my teeth as a security expert in IT. And I was tasked with securing everything around the Marines' presence online and otherwise. I got out. My wife and I decided that her career was going to go somewhere. She's a great Marine. And I couldn't keep my mouth shut very well. So I got out and started working for Salesforce as their head of compliance. Then went to an AI company for about 1.5 years and then just landed at Binti about 1.5 years ago also. So it's a long, windy road. And every time I come close to hopping from one company to the next, I swear up and down that I won't deal with the government anymore. But I have been so far unsuccessful in actually escaping the gravity well.
But I mean, in a very interesting sort of homecoming, if you will, you're back where you started when you got your degree in social work. And so I think that is the perfect sort of, now you are where you are. And that's a great transition into telling all of us a little bit about Binti and your mission. And I just want to preface it with, part of why I was so excited to do this talk is that I think, we've had amazing sessions all day today, and there's so much practical advice and knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer. But when we're talking about security and API security specifically, right? Machine to machine, and it's very easy to lose the why we all do what we do, and the real world impact beyond just the headlines and the fear or what happens after a breach, but the real what's actually sitting behind a lot of these APIs. And so I think that the story of Binti and what you guys are doing there really helps to humanize why we do what we do, and what APIs really are sitting in front of. Maybe not every API, but a lot of the APIs that exist out in the world that we're trying to protect, there's real life implications if those were breached. So with that, like, share a little bit about what Binti is and the mission there, and what you all are trying to do and accomplish.
Yeah, sure. And I think you said it really well, that it is coming full circle. After getting my degree in social work, which is just an amazing journey that I went on, and then, heading into security, when I first heard about the listing at Binti for the CISO position, I think it was like less than an hour after it posted. I'm pretty sure I was the first applicant, very sure I was the first person that they interviewed, and then like a long 3-month tail after that, to close the deal and everything. But I had told the CEO, Felicia, that, I was going to wash windows, clean bathrooms, whatever, but I was going to work for Binti. So they just needed to pick where. And as a side note, for those of you that are in security or looking in the job market, if you have the opportunity to work at a company that is led by women primarily, you should do it immediately. It's just such a breath of fresh air to be in a much more nurturing, loving environment. But all that to say, at Binti, we're trying to revolutionize child welfare. Our primary goal right now is in the foster care and adoption space. So what we want to do is modernize the way that foster care and adoption occurs in the United States primarily right now, so that more kids can find long-term, permanent, safe, and loving houses. It's something that every day when I wake up and every day when I have the opportunity to go to work, I know that everything I do is in the service of that mission. And so, for example, the way that looks is in the state of Washington right now. If anybody wants to become a foster parent in Washington state, very soon they'll be going through Binti's platform. And instead of filling out, a stack of actual paper made from trees, they can actually go online and fill out all the information they need to be able to be licensed to become foster parents. What that does primarily is it saves the time and work, effort, toil of the social workers, also the foster families, and it leads to more foster families being in the system to give more kids a chance at having a loving home. And so, every time that we make an improvement or, speed up a process, what we're doing is we're taking away, paperwork time or spreadsheet time from a social worker and actually allowing them to interact more with the families and more with the kids, which is just so needed. I think we have about 30 odd states. If somebody from the company is watching this, they're going to get me because I don't remember the numbers exactly, but we're covering 13 states entirely. And then we have presence across the country. And it's, when you're talking about the API in particular, the way that we use it, a lot of times it is used to go between the legacy system of the social workers or of the agency and Binti to make sure that information that was entered into our site is transferred properly, or vice versa. And even that by itself, like the fact that we can transfer data from an old system to our system or back and forth, just means that that's another set of data that the social worker doesn't have to enter in twice. Again, saving them more time so that they can do more of the work that they really want to be doing. And it was interesting that recently one of the guys that I was actually in the social work program with him, I hadn't seen him for maybe 10 or 12 years, actually is the director of child welfare in the state that we went to school in. And we hopped on a call, saw each other's faces, and hadn't talked in forever, but it was just really touching to see somebody that I went to school with and studied with that's actually doing the work on the other end of the computer that I'm up to.
And so, you talk about all the different states and municipalities that Binti serves. I can only imagine what that means from an API or a security perspective, just because they're probably all over the map in terms of what systems you need to connect into and their level of sophistication, what they know about security or don't know about security. So talk to me just a little bit about kind of what that journey has been like from a security perspective. How do you guys approach it, and how do you interface with, I guess, each of those organizations? Because that's got to be a lot.
Yeah, it is. And one of the reasons why we're so successful and we believe so strongly in what we do is because it's normally when a child welfare system is created for a state or a local government or an agency, they start with the rule book with all the laws at the administration building, and then they build a system that way. And with the social workers, they're never consulted. They generally are just, they have to like keep track of everything on a spreadsheet and then enter it into their system. And different states have different, degrees of that. But what we've done is we went out and spent hundreds and hundreds of hours interviewing social workers, foster families, kids who were in foster care, and just found out like what was painful, like what was hard about this process, what took the most time. And that's where we focused first. And what we found is that doing so, we hit almost all the requirements that the rule book had anyway, and we can fit almost any workflow that these different agencies and states have, because there are some states that are extremely sophisticated and well-funded systems, and there's other states that really aren't. And those states that aren't need us more than the states that are actually really sophisticated, because they need modernization in their system. And so from a security perspective, it also means that every state, every county, every agency has different security requirements and different questions. So I do spend a lot of time answering those questions and kind of letting them know, like, we're doing everything we should be doing. We're SOC 2 compliant. We're not just compliant, we're also very secure. But it's definitely an interesting ride to see all of the different ways that this process is interpreted. The different requirements that are there are just very, very broad. As you say, all over the map, literally and figuratively. Different states and agencies do things differently.
It's interesting that you said educate, right? And I think that that's something, it's a thread that I've heard in almost every one of the tracks and talk sessions today, is just this notion that there's one side of our job, which is sort of the doer and the learner, right? Where we're constantly educating ourselves on what's new and what are the latest threats and how do we protect against them. But there's this whole other element that I think is often overlooked in the role of security, and that is cross education, whether it's your peers on the development side of the house, just the organization in general about security best practices, or in this case, as you say, many of your customers or partners, right, where that can fully be half or more, honestly, of our jobs. And I think it's a really overlooked element that in the end, probably, as heavily as anything else, weighs on our ability to succeed in whatever our mission is, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, especially along the lines that, there's a trend in security for a long time, especially when I was first starting out, as viewing your end user as the most vulnerable, or like the one attack surface that was going to be, most exploited. But in the end, the way that we treat it, especially at Binti, is that, we actually rely on every single one of our end users and employees to make good decisions. So we try and keep them informed and try and keep their own awareness up so that they can protect themselves and help protect, customer data. I mean, at the end of the day, like, our technology is amazing what it does for the social workers, but it's not like groundbreaking quantum computations, and it's not, the cool, self-driving car. We don't have AI anywhere in the platform because it's not necessary yet. And like, but what we do is protect the data that we have, because it's not that data is so sensitive necessarily by itself, but we're actually protecting the reputation of the agencies and the states that we serve. And the last thing that, what keeps me awake at night is that if we do have some kind of issue and it causes the population that those agencies serve to lose trust in that agency, that may mean that less people will be likely to apply to be foster parents, or there will be, less trust in that system, and the kids that really need it don't really, won't have the same opportunities. And I keep that in the forefront of my mind, because at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of different ways that we can do these things. But, if I went to one of the children served by our platform and asked them, like, do you really care if I do this way or that way? And they're like, no, not really. I actually just kind of want to have a loving family, if that's okay. And like, that's our guiding principle. Like, our first and most important value is to put the child first. And it makes everything pretty simple decision-wise when you're always just thinking of what's going to be best for the child in the situation.
Yeah, I think that's, that is a lot of what I was hinting at earlier with it's, we oftentimes think of APIs, any security breach, API or non-API related, any security breach in terms of the headlines that it garners or what data is going to be exposed and how valuable or sensitive is that data. And it becomes this very removed sort of, it is what it is, especially when you think of a lot of them tend to be banking related or, something that's like, we've all become somewhat numb to it. Maybe I'm the only one, but I've become very numb to the notion of, your credit card's been like it happens. I don't know why it happens to me as often as it does, but it's probably every other month or 2 months that one of my credit cards, I get an alert that says, hey, if this wasn't you, we're going to shut it down. Super inconvenient, but it happens so much that I'm sort of numb to it. And I guess I don't think of that as losing trust in the bank or the payments company, but there are other areas where absolutely I would, right? And so I think your point about what you're protecting, it's not just the data or the information, because as you say, most of it is public domain, but the impact that will have on people's lives is real and immediate, and that impacts other people's lives then, right? Just when you said that to me, the notion that if foster families lose trust in the system, less people will apply to be foster families. And that's a truly, disheartening and somewhat terrifying thought to think that's the impact, right? It's not a ransom that you have to pay. It's many children's lives and what their lived experience will be. And you shared a story with me when we were chatting last week, and it was a really powerful story that I think really brought home not just the value of the time that social workers have, but also the disconnectedness of the systems and how Binti and the way that you function could connect. And so it was the story about, a child and their, and so if you could share that, because I think that's also this notion of, yes, it's machine to machine communications, but when you're talking about, different government entities and how difficult it is to share information between those entities, this is a really powerful use case, right, of why Binti needs to exist, or others like Binti need to exist.
Yeah, for sure. And it's worth sharing that whenever we do company offsites, every company offsite I've experienced in the past was either like, let's talk about business and numbers all day and let's go and have a wild party. That's not how we do. We actually get together and spend very little time talking about company stuff. We almost always spend most of our time listening to people with lived experience. And one of the stories that was shared with us was about a guy that grew up in the foster care system, entered it when he was like a pre-teenager, and unbeknownst to him or anybody else, his aunt was like a county over, had foster kids in her home, or kids who were experiencing foster care in her home, and she would have had the space and the ability to actually bring him into her home, but because her record was stuffed in one box full of paper and his record was in a different box, and nobody was there to like correlate those two or make the connection, he ended up aging out of the system and staying in foster care until he was 18, and he, to this day, I can only imagine how impactful that must be to him to know that that was the case. And that was one of the appeals that he made to us, was to like fix that. And so that's one of the projects we have, is a family finding module that allows people to look for known kin or fictive kin of kids who are experiencing foster care, so that they can be closer to home, be with people that love them and their family if possible.
Yeah, and so it's just an amazing example of the power that these APIs can bring, right, to change people's lives. Not just, and I think that a lot of times when we think of APIs, we think of like revenue and innovation and what can we make money off of, and how can we, versus just sometimes the simplest connecting of the dots. changes something that's far more valuable than, than whatever the next untapped revenue stream is.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess, one of the, we're not too far off on our time, but I would love to hear, kind of back to where we started. If there are, at AppySec University specifically, we get a lot of service members coming in and educating themselves. And so I think that's pretty powerful, that these are people who are self-educating and trying to get into the, the cybersecurity space. So I just wonder if there's any advice or groups that you specifically have ties to, or that you've worked with, that are either mentor agencies or, just loosely cobbled together groups of people that have a shared passion for encouraging people. But I think that's, it's a non-traditional path, I guess I would say, into cybersecurity. But then I look at cybersecurity and I think most people that I know here took a non-traditional path to get here. So if you have any advice for those listening that are just kind of breaking in, like what would you say to you 20 years ago, or it's 15 years ago?
Yeah, no kidding. And a lot of things. I would tell myself all kinds of cool stuff, like who won the Super Bowl win. But mostly, like, I think I got the best advice from a guy at Salesforce. That was when I worked at Salesforce. I was running their compliance program. He was just a gentleman that was in the Marine Corps a long time before me. He said, just whatever happens, go find a commercial company, prove that you can live in the commercial world, and then prove yourself, and then you can take off from there. And the other, great piece of advice that I've heard that I wish I would have known is that every city, no matter how big or small, has meetups and get-togethers of like different organizations where people will sit around and talk shop about either cybersecurity or tech. Go get known, go network, and go find those people. And honestly, like, I spend, a solid 20, 25 hours every month mentoring other veterans that are either getting out or thinking about it. You can just reach out directly to me. I'll talk to you. My time is your time because somebody else helped me out, and I am obligated to do the same. That was the one agreement that I made. And so just reach out to people and network, find out what they can help you with.
That's great advice. And thank you for all the time that you put back into the community, because I know you don't tout it much, but you do a lot. I see it. I stalk people's profiles and then watch people online, and I see, all the people that are involved in giving back. And I think that that's great. And I know that you're a big champion for diversity in cybersecurity, whether that means women or service members, anyone that's an underrepresented, population. So I appreciate that. And thank you so much for taking the time and talking to all of us today. I just really appreciate having, maybe we're not all made that way, but being reminded of the mission behind why we do what we do, and that it's not just bits and bytes, it's not just dollars and cents. It's truly, I think most people in this profession have some sort of calling to be here. And it's to do good, not just, it's to fight the good fight and to do good things. Not just, not just because we like to dig into code.
Exactly.
So thank you, Adam. We have one more session this afternoon. If you have any questions for Adam specifically, I didn't see any in the comments, but I forgot to ask up front if people wanted to ask them. But if you do have them, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'll make sure they find their way to Adam, and he'll answer you offline. But thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. That's going to be one of the coolest Airbnbs ever. So thanks for sharing that with us as well.
Yeah.
Have a great afternoon, Adam.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.